before we ask for Tom's comments, would like to throw out, as commentator, a question that maybe would frame those. We're as well interested, of course, as to build on what you gentlemen have said about U.S. policy towards Russia now. How can we provide effective, assisted, smart, intelligent assistance to those who most need it, shall we say? We can judge that. Particularly, of late, we've heard a bit about some of this possible seed money. I'd like Tom to comment on that as well, such as it is, if you would, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tony, and thanks to IFES for organizing today's discussion. Celebrating 25 years of the work that IFES has done is a great idea and a great occasion. IFES has deep roots in the American political system and has now established a global range of experts and expertise to be available to those emerging democracies that want to avail themselves of that in election management, civil society, civic education. So I'm glad to be back here at IFES on this occasion. So thanks for having me. I really wanted to come to learn from real experts about Russia, and I haven't been disappointed at all by the initial presentations by Ambassador Collins and Wayne Mary, who obviously speak from long experience in Russia and its neighborhood. And they said some provocative things and some things that I hadn't thought about quite yet, and so it's already been valuable to me. So thank you, gentlemen. Let me start with with what Tony said and say, our policy on Russia is that Russia is very important to the United States. It's a complex, big, important country that also has broad reach in the world and affects our interests in many different ways. And in this administration, we've been engaged in a very vigorous effort to talk to the Russian government at various levels and in a wide range of areas. And we found it possible to cooperate with the Russian government over these years now in a range of things that are important to the United States, important to our interests, and important to Russia. And we think that the reset, as it's often called, has been successful in this. And while this is a discussion about elections and democracy in Russia, it's important to know that while we continue to disagree on some important things in security, in missile defense discussion around Europe, in what to do about Syria, and in some other things, we actually have found common ground, and that comes from intense, continuous engagement with our Russian counterparts. And we have set up, as many of you know, a formal structure to do this on a regular basis, the Bilateral Presidential Commission that was created by our two presidents in 2009. And we've set up now 20 working groups that provide continuous ways for us to engage government to government. And I am now the co-chair of one of those working groups, the Civil Society Working Group, which enables us to both talk to the Russian government about the enabling environment for civil society and also to provide ways to bring civil society into a number of these bilateral discussions that otherwise would be just government to government. And so we are reinvigorating that and trying to broaden that this spring. And we're in the middle of a planning process that hopefully will lead to some additions to that bilateral engagement with Russia about civil society and with civil society in the various dimensions that suggests. So the reset has many ways in which it's been successful. And so, and it's important to remember that while President Medvedev has been president, Vladimir Putin has been prime minister. It's not like he went away. He's been very much a part of Russia's government these last 3 years. So having him come back into the presidency doesn't necessarily change a lot about our engagement with Russia. He's very familiar with what our bilateral cooperation has been over these last several years. As the positions change in Russia's government, we'll see what the implications of that are, whether policies will change as a result. So it's not automatically or immediately clear that they will, or if they do, in what ways. So as in many aspects of this conversation today, I like to quote my favorite American philosopher, Yogi Berra, who said it's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future. And so I think that's important to keep in mind as we're in this transition period in Russia's government between the election and the inauguration that comes in early May. Our policy, moreover, is not just to engage with Russia, but it's to see it succeed. We want Russia to be a successful country in the 21st century, to be prosperous, to be at peace, to be stable, to be a constructive partner in the international arena. So that's our hopes for Russia. Now, you may have heard or read in the Russian media that people in Russia sometimes say we have other intentions for Russia, but those are our intentions. We want it to be a successful country and a good partner for us in all the things that we can do together in the world. Now, on to the elections. So I think one of the most interesting commentaries on the election was provided on the day or so after the election by the Golus network, the civic monitors of the election in Russia, both in December and in March. Golus said in its summary of the election, it said, in general, the Russian Federation presidential elections can be characterized as normal in the context of the past decade of Russian elections, with an insufficient level of competition, government interference with the electoral process, and some degree of coercion to vote. These elections cannot be classified as free and fair under the definitions provided in the Russian Constitution and international electoral standards. Presidential elections can be characterized as normal. Now, Ambassador Collins has asked, is there a new normal? And I think that's an important question. If these elections were, because Ambassador Collins said these were not normal elections, that there was something, a different dynamic in December and in the presidential elections. And I think both things are true. I think in the administration of the elections and in the sort of larger structural environment around the elections, they were not unusual in the ways that Golus described and the way that the ODIHR delegation summarized after the election. But something else changed. The new normal is not the structure of the elections as such. The new normal is the citizenry of Russia, which has seemed to awaken somehow in these last few months in a way that is different. And there's also been, I would say equally interestingly, a new normal in the way that the Russian authorities reacted to that over these months, from December 4th to December 10th to December 24th to right up to the February 26th, I think, was the date for the Ring Road protest around Moscow, in which tens of thousands of people came out in what seemed to be, looking at the photos on the various websites that posted photos of that, kind of a celebratory atmosphere. It was really kind of remarkable. They weren't throwing rocks at the Kremlin. They were standing up and celebrating their sort of awakening Russian citizenship in a way that I think was quite interesting to watch. And that's the question. Is that the new normal? Are Russians going to act like citizens rather than subjects? And what will be the reaction of their government at every level, whether municipal police authorities, to governors, to mayors, to the federal authorities? Will there continue to be the kind of tolerance of demonstrations and criticism that we saw over these last several months? Or will there be some kind of change in a different direction in the months ahead, particularly after May 8th? We don't know. It's hard to predict the future. But we'll be watching that very closely. And among the ways that we will make our judgments and draw our conclusions is what will happen on the internet space, the cyberspace, where if broadcast television and most of radio and most of the national print media are normal Russian Federation media, the internet has created a different kind of space and a different kind of discourse in Russia. Partly because it's that middle class that Wayne Mary described so well, that modernizing European-style middle class that is more about, I think he put it very aptly, attitude and expectations, lifestyle, not necessarily wealth or an income level, reflected in that notion of middle class or modernizers. They communicate generally on the internet, on web platforms and through social media and so on. And that's where these demonstrations emerge from, not through a central planning mechanism, but through social media. And that's interesting, that's new. Whether that becomes the new normal or not, time will tell. But I think there is something that has changed in Russia. And it's important to note, and again, this is not necessarily what you would have read in the official media in Russia, that this is not an American invention. This is not a Western imposition on Russia. This is something that Russians have done for themselves, by themselves. And our job, again, to echo what I think Ambassador Collins said earlier, as outsiders, is not to insert ourselves and make ourselves the story in Russia. we're supporting actors on the outside, all of us, whether in government or in civil society or the NGO world or however. This is a Russian story, and the changes in it have been driven by Russians. And our role as outsiders is to be clear about what our interests are. And there's a wide range of interests that we have in security and economics and environment and what goes on in other parts of the world. But among our interests is to be true to our own values, that we believe that free societies are more likely to be successful societies. We believe that individuals have rights that should be respected by governments. And I think we have to continue to be, as we have been, straightforward, not hysterical, not alarmist, but straightforward in saying that we believe that modern governments should respect the international norms that have emerged over the last couple of generations. Russia's a major player in the world system. They have subscribed to all of the OSCE covenants and declarations and agreements. They are pretty clear about what all the governments of the OSCE have acknowledged to be aspects of modern political society. And we engage with Russia in the OSCE and in other environments, and we'll continue to do so and remind them of what they've signed up to and what we think that means. But we will do that not so much in an accusatory way, but in a straightforward way. And we will continue to provide assistance to those who request it. And not every actor in Russia or in other countries wants to have political or material or advisory assistance from Americans or outsiders. But if they want to avail themselves of the experience the world has, like through IFES about how elections can be better managed, or how parties can be organized, or how newspapers and media outlets can be organized, then we think it's a normal thing to be done to enable that to happen. And so we will continue to support civil society in Russia, modernizing journalists, other efforts, as we continue to work with those government structures that seek advice and experience from the rest of the world. We will continue to support those efforts by non-governmental actors to engage with their Russian counterparts. Tony asked at the beginning about whether there's going to be new or more assistance in this regard. There's been a fair amount in the last few years. It's been probably a little bit over $200 million that's been made available in different kinds of programs and projects between Russians and Americans on what could be described very broadly as democracy or governance assistance in the last three years of this administration. There's an opportunity. We're in discussion with the Hill about whether there is a way to create a new kind of fund for supporting civil society in Russia. That's up for discussion right now. It hasn't taken some concrete form to that. We're going back and forth with people in the Congress about whether and how that might be created. There's been some mention of that in the newspapers recently, and that is an ongoing discussion. But we'll continue to do that. It's been unfortunate that there has been this anti-American aspect to the campaign in Russia in the last couple of months. The Russian public, the interested Russian public, can make of that what they will. We are what we are. We're pretty straightforward about it. We will continue to be rooting for Russia's success and for its continued democratization. And at the same time, we will be continuing to engage with the Russian government on the wide range of interests that we need to work with them on. I guess maybe I'll finish with one last comment. We were also asked to think about whether there's any lessons to be drawn from the Russian election experience of the last few months and what it might mean for neighboring countries. Of the several that are having elections later this year, I think the one that's probably the most interesting in many ways is Ukraine. They'll have parliamentary elections in October. Ukraine is also coming in next January as the chairman in office of the OSCE for a year. And I think it's telling that even though Ukraine has gone off its democratization trajectory in the last 18 months or so, and we've been very straightforward with the Ukrainians about that, I think that these elections will be an important barometer of where Ukraine is, about how the elections will be conducted and what the voters of Ukraine will decide about their future. The fact that Ukraine has already sent an official invitation to ODIHR, the OSCE's Office for Democratic Initiatives and Human Rights, to monitor the autumn parliamentary elections, I think is a good sign. I expect monitors to be on the ground hopefully early and throughout this period. That's a good sign, and we'll continue to engage with the Ukrainians on that. They have, akin to the Golos network in Russia, of course, there are 2 networks in Ukraine that do this kind of work and will provide citizen monitoring of the election process in Ukraine. And how they're treated and what they observe and what they report to the rest of us will be an important part of our assessment of where Ukraine is headed. But certainly if Ukraine can succeed in getting back on its democratic trajectory in the course of this year, that will provide an important reinforcement to Russia's better instincts, or the better instincts of those Russians who want to continue modernizing the country. So we think that the Ukrainian election this year will be quite significant for Russia, just as Russia's recent experience, I think, has been very closely studied in Ukraine, and people have taken to heart a lot of the lessons about mobilization and about election management and about all the things that we've talked about. So I'll be glad to take questions, and maybe I'll leave it at that, and we can go forward.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, gentlemen, for your comments. There's certainly a lot of takeaways from the discussion thus far. A lot of possible directions that things could head in, and I think we have certainly a better idea now of what the chemistry of that process may be like. Perhaps not exactly in what will in fact crystallize from that, but certainly the elements of that.